Welcome to this Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating real-world guide tailored specifically for the DES 25 cohort. We're going to unpack exactly how to build sustainable ecological trails right here in Kenya. We'll be exploring the precise engineering principles, the strict legal frameworks, and the gritty environmental realities you need to master this assignment prompt. By the end of this, you'll be fully equipped to pitch these exact concepts to a local community conservancy with total confidence. Let's get into it.
So, here is our roadmap. We're going to kick things off with the value proposition, move into the legal baseline, get our hands dirty with field engineering and tools, do a quick reality check on the benefits versus the challenges, and finally, lock it all in with long-term viability and auditing.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to start with a somewhat counterintuitive question about balancing recreation with ecological integrity. You know, when we think of building infrastructure, we usually think of destruction, right? So how exactly do we protect 91% of a fragile, pristine habitat from the heavy impact of human recreation?
Well, the answer is actually 99%. Literally, by containing 99% of visitor traffic to a single, highly visible and perfectly engineered line, we actively shield the rest of the surrounding environment from being trampled. You aren't just clearing a path out there in the bush, you are engineering an active containment shield.
Okay, moving right into our first core pillar, the value proposition. Let's look at how this trail strategy actually builds our case for protecting Kenya's most vulnerable landscapes. The sheer scale of the challenge we face is absolutely massive. Arid and semi-arid lands, or ASALs, cover over 80% of Kenya. For the vast majority of your projects, you're going to be dealing with incredibly fragile topsoil crusts that desperately need protection from unregulated human traffic. Just a few careless disruptions in these specific zones can rapidly accelerate desertification. It's a real domino effect. But of course, it isn't just the arid lands. Whether you're navigating the high-altitude, slow-growing giant lobelias of Mount Kenya's montane zones, or the critical water filters around Lake Naivasha, each of these sensitive zones demands strict containment strategies. If a trail simply has to pass through these areas, you've got to use specialized engineering. I'm talking about elevated boardwalks over wetlands or strictly defined rocky paths in alpine zones, ensuring foot traffic never directly touches that fragile ground. Which brings us to legal compliance. Before a single shovel ever hits the dirt, any local authority is going to want to know your project is fully compliant. So, let's break down the legal baseline.
We ground our entire authority right here in Article 69 of the Constitution of Kenya. This is brilliant because it gives your trail project undeniable legal weight from day one. You are directly participating in the state's constitutional mandate to sustainably manage the environment. Now, on a practical level, you've got a strict regulatory checklist to follow. Under the 1999 EMCA, you absolutely must obtain a NEMA EII license before breaking ground. No exceptions. Plus, if you're in protected areas, you have to follow strict KWS standards for wildlife, human safety, and noise control. Building in community conservancies? Then the Community Land Act kicks in, requiring documented free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, from local stakeholders. You literally cannot skip these steps if you want your project to survive.
All right, with the legal green light established and our EIA licenses securely in hand, let's transition into the practical how-to of field engineering. How do we translate this design into reality? Well, here is your required tech stack for the reconnaissance phase. We're blending field hardware with digital mapping to ensure absolute precision. You'll be using handheld GPS, QGIS, and drones to map out the corridor and overlay any wildlife hazards. You'll need soil augers to test compaction and drainage, but arguably your most crucial tool, the clinometer, which you'll use for slope grading. So, why do we care so much about that clinometer? To strictly enforce what's known as the half rule. You can think of this as the golden ratio for dirt. It's a foundational engineering principle stating that a trail's grade must never exceed half the hillside's grade. If you ignore this rule, your brand new trail is going to rapidly become a washed-out gully the second those heavy tropical downpours hit. Building on that principle, this 5-step procedure takes us safely from initial wet and dry season scouting straight through to physical construction. I want you to really notice Step 2, consulting with community forest associations or CFAs. This step is absolutely vital to ensure your route doesn't interfere with community resource zones. Once steps 1 through 3 are locked down, we move to layout, using biodegradable flagging tape to mark the exact center line before any tread shaping begins. Once you actually reach that layout and construction phase,
Deploying full bench construction is a total game changer. This means you are cutting the trail bed entirely into the solid hillside rather than building it on unstable, loose-filled dirt. This specific technique guarantees long-term stability for your conservancy, totally preventing structural collapse when those inevitable heavy rains arrive.
And to make it even more resilient, you combine that solid full bench cut with a 2 to 3% outslope on the tread. By angling the path just slightly outward, you ensure those intense East African rains sheet naturally across the path and down the hill. Without this, the water channels right down the center of your trail, carving out a massive, unwalkable trench.
Now, let's take a quick reality check. We need to balance these engineering ideals with the unique East African realities your team will face out there in the field, because, let's be honest, it's not all just a walk in the woods.
This work is incredibly rewarding, but it's a delicate balancing act. On the one hand, the benefits are phenomenal. You're preventing habitat fragmentation, protecting critical water towers like the Mao Forest Complex from siltation, and generating alternative green economies, like turning former poachers into guides via the CFAs. But on the flip side, the local challenges are fierce. We have to actively mitigate human-wildlife conflict, like sudden, dangerous encounters with buffaloes or elephants, which means coordinating constant ranger patrols. Plus, there's the very real threat of hikers unintentionally spreading invasive species seeds, like Lantana camara, deep into pristine zones just from the mud on their boots.
Acknowledging those field challenges naturally brings us to the final piece of unpacking this assignment: proving the long-term viability of the investment. And you do that through rigorous, scheduled maintenance and auditing.
Let me be clear, routine tasks are completely non-negotiable. You have to maintain standard clearance zones of 2 meters wide by 2.5 meters high so hikers aren't forced to step off the path to avoid brush. You must constantly scoop silt and debris out of your water bars. When repairing ruts, always use compacted local mineral soil. Never ever use organic topsoil, which just turns instantly to mud. And for those wetland zones, you've got to regularly inspect elevated boardwalks for termite damage or rot.
Because if you slip up on that strict maintenance, you're going to get what we call trail braiding. This happens when the main trail gets muddy or blocked. Hikers, naturally, just step around the obstacle, creating multiple, parallel, user-created paths. Trail braiding instantly fragments the exact fragile microhabitats we're working so hard to protect in the first place. To stop this in its tracks, we conduct diagnostic trail audits twice a year, specifically pre- and post-rainy season. This rhythm allows us to detect drainage issues early, identify hazard trees, and proactively block those unauthorized social trails by dragging heavy brush across them long before they turn into permanent scars on the landscape. So as you take these guidelines back to your DESS 25 projects, I really want you to ask yourself one final question. Will your ecosystem management leave a permanent legacy of conservation, or is it going to become just another eroded path in the wild? The tools, the laws, and the engineering principles are all right here for you to use. Go out there and build something sustainable. Thanks for joining me in this explainer.